Hey guys, today's story is a little different. Imagine sitting in a crowded auditorium, the buzz of excitement thick in the air, parents clapping, students glowing in their caps and gowns, and your daughter's name being called from the stage. Your daughter, your pride, your everything. You stand to cheer, heart full, hands slightly trembling from emotion. But before the applause even dies, your wife, your partner of 22 years, walks to the podium and delivers a speech that doesn't just change the mood. It detonates your entire life. My name is Mark Brennan. I'm 48, a software engineer, and for over 2 decades I thought I was a husband and a father in a family that believed in loyalty. Turns out, only one of us still did. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever had someone betray your trust so boldly they didn't even flinch. Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. It was my daughter Emma's graduation day, and I can still remember how the light spilled through the blinds that morning, so ordinary it almost felt cruel in hindsight. She was graduating from Stanford, top of her class, the kind of kid who made every sacrifice feel worth it. Julia, my wife, was in full event planner mode. She picked out Emma's dress, organized a private dinner, even printed out little programs with her face on the cover. She fussed over every detail like it was a coronation. It should have been a celebration. But something about her was off. Her energy was sharp, rehearsed. She barely touched her coffee. Her eyes kept flicking to her phone. I told myself it was nerves, maybe pride. But that was just me choosing the easy story because I already knew something wasn't right. We arrived early and sat close to the stage, front row, left side, the perfect vantage point. Emma waved at us from the processional line, her smile stretching wide, eyes bright with everything the world hadn't yet tried to dim. That smile still guts me. It was honest. Earned. Pure. For that moment alone, I could have sworn I was the luckiest man alive. And then Julia stood. At first, I assumed she was going to give a quick tribute, maybe a surprise message for Emma. Even Emma looked puzzled, but she nodded supportively. Julia stepped up to the podium and took a breath. Today, I'm not just here as Emma's mom, she began, her voice smooth and unnervingly steady. I'm here as a woman standing in her own truth. My stomach tightened. It was such an odd thing to say, scripted, almost like she was auditioning for a monologue no one asked for. She kept going. I want to say, I've loved this journey. I've loved raising this brilliant young woman. But today I also begin a new chapter. One that doesn't include my husband. The crowd rippled. Heads turned. Emma's smile evaporated, frozen in confusion. I stared at Julia, willing myself to misunderstand her. But she stood tall, composed, the quiet thrill of control flashing behind her eyes. Mark and I have grown apart, she continued. And I know this isn't the place, but it is the moment for me to live authentically. To stop pretending. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Because I already knew. She thought she was dropping a bomb. But I'd been living in the crater for weeks. I knew about the burner phone in her gym bag. I knew about the hotel charges on our credit card bill. I knew the man Bryce knew. Truth. I knew everything. But I hadn't confronted her. Not yet. Because confrontation without evidence is just drama. And I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in precision. So I sat there, calm, watching her try to spin betrayal into empowerment. She wanted applause. Sympathy. Control. But she didn't get rage from me. She didn't even get a reaction. Because I had something better, a file. On my laptop. Encrypted. Time-stamped. A digital portfolio of her lies. conversations, hotel receipts, screenshots. All filed under one folder titled Exit Plan. I didn't unzip it yet. That wasn't the moment. Not while my daughter stood on that stage, still processing the betrayal wrapped in a bow and delivered during the biggest day of her life. That wasn't justice. That was ego. And I'd already spent enough time swallowing mine. I wasn't going to let Julia's performance steal Emma's spotlight. So I let her finish. I let the room settle. And then I leaned back, smiled just slightly, and waited. Because real revenge isn't rushed. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw chairs or ruin the moment. Real revenge waits until the spotlight turns cold, and then it rewrites the story. When the ceremony ended, Julia didn't come looking for me. That said more than any post-speech apology ever could have. She stayed at the reception area with her sister, laughing too brightly, her glass of champagne trembling ever so slightly in her hand. She thought she had pulled off a grand exit, thought she'd owned the moment. And maybe, for the ones watching from a distance, she had. But she forgot something critical. I wasn't just standing there stunned. I was watching her. Every gesture. Every calculated pause. She wanted the audience. I wanted the truth. And I already had it. The weeks leading up to graduation were full of late nights she said she was catching up with clients, or volunteering for the school committee. At first, I believed her. We were both busy people. I'm a systems engineer with a consulting firm, and we often worked opposite schedules. But then there were whispers. Emma once casually asked why Mom was dressing up for coffee with Coach Bryce. It barely registered at the time. Just another name from Emma's soccer team. But then I checked the phone bill and found numbers I didn't recognize, showing up far too often for comfort. I'm not the confrontational type. That's not to say I'm passive, just deliberate. I've worked in cybersecurity for over 2 decades, and if there's one thing I understand, it's how to trace a digital footprint without leaving one of your own. So instead of asking Julia questions she'd lie through, I installed a simple keystroke logger on her laptop. Nothing malicious, just a quiet witness. Within days, I had passwords, conversations, browser histories, photos and cloud folders I was never invited to see, dinners, hotel bookings, even a shared Spotify playlist with titles like Our Little Secret and Us Against the World. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I documented. Each night, I added to the folder. It became a ritual. Not because I was obsessed, but because I wanted the truth in full. I didn't want to be accused of twisting anything. I wanted her story as she told it, unfiltered. Every, I miss you. Every, he never sees me. Every lie dressed up in vulnerability. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been soul-crushing. I remember sitting at our dining table one night, Emma asleep upstairs, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I stared at the file I'd assembled and wondered how many people lived in illusions like mine, sleeping beside strangers, raising children with ghosts. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that I'd known for years something was off, and I chose not to look. Chose comfort. Chose routine. That changed the night I heard them on a recorded call. She was talking to him, telling him how she felt, caged, at home. How I was nice but predictable. How she couldn't wait for this last thing, meaning graduation, so she could finally breathe. That's when I knew. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing to erase me. I started making copies. USB drives, external hard backups. I encrypted each one with different keys, placed them in locations she'd never think to look me. Office, my brother's safe, even inside the lining of a worn-out suitcase I hadn't used in years. I didn't know how far she'd go, but I knew I had to be 10 steps ahead. If she wanted out, fine. But she wouldn't rewrite the narrative to make herself the hero. Then came the graduation. The speech. The self-congratulatory smirk. And my silence. I could tell she was thrown off. She expected me to stand up, to shout, to crumble. Instead, I clapped politely at the end of the ceremony, hugged Emma, and told her I'd see her at the dinner. Julia didn't even look at me, just kept talking to Bryce's sister, who'd shown up under the guise of being a friend from the community board. The gall of it made my jaw ache. That night, back home, I opened the folder again. This time, I renamed it. I called it June Reset. I didn't know what my endgame was yet. Divorce, yes, but more than that. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to feel what it was like to lose control in a space she thought she ruled. But more than anything, I wanted Emma to know the truth. Not immediately. Not through bitterness. But one day. She deserved to know why her parents fell apart without believing it was her fault. I stayed up till 2 that night, organizing timestamps, cross-referencing messages. I printed out a few emails, circled the important lines, tucked them in a manila envelope marked legal. There was no rush. I had waited this long. I could wait a little longer. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about precision. Patience. Letting the other person keep playing the wrong game while you quietly set the board. When Julia came home that night late again, still in heels, her lipstick too fresh, I didn't say a word. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat down at the island, and opened her phone, giggling quietly at something I'm sure wasn't funny. I watched her from the hallway, just for a moment. She thought she'd won. That she had rewritten the story, stepped into some brave new chapter. She had no idea the preface was already written and I held the pen. The next few days passed in an odd blur, like the world was in motion, but I was standing still. Julia went about her days with an eerie lightness, like she'd been unburdened. I watched her pack bags under the guise of a quick work trip, ignoring the fact that she folded her clothes too neatly, chose her perfume too deliberately. Emma was still glowing from graduation, texting friends, finalizing her internship details, and floating in that rare bubble of post-achievement bliss. I kept my focus on her. Her joy mattered more than my ego. But beneath the surface, my plan was taking shape. I made an appointment with my lawyer, James, someone I'd known since college. I handed him the USB drive without flinching. His eyes flicked over the contents, PDFs of email threads, screenshots of conversations, receipts, even photos from a private investigator I'd reluctantly hired to confirm what I already knew. "She's not just having an affair," James said, shaking his head. "She's building a case." False narrative. Emotional distance. Prepping for court. "You did the right thing by documenting this early." That line stayed with me. She wasn't just walking away, she was planning to burn the house down, and claimed she never held the match. James advised we move quietly. No confrontation yet. We'd prepare a full legal response, but I wanted something more poetic before the legalese kicked in. Something that wouldn't be forgotten. The problem with calculated betrayals is that they rely on one thing, the other person staying blind. I'd spent too long playing dumb. That was over. At home, I began organizing a digital presentation. A single file, one click, one reveal. Inside, a compressed folder of labeled evidence, a timeline, a personal letter addressed to Julia, and a private message to Emma, which I wouldn't release until she was ready. I titled the folder, Truth Unfiltered. Then I did something unexpected. I emailed it to myself, with the subject line, "In case she tries again." A safeguard. A reminder. I even set a time backup to auto-upload to a cloud account if I didn't log in for 48 hours. Redundancy was key. I wasn't just protecting my side of the story, I was protecting my daughter from a version of reality that would have twisted her against me. Meanwhile, Julia started acting more aloof at home. She wasn't mean, just distant. Polite like a guest. She'd stop in the doorway, ask about my day with the kind of hollow interest you reserve for small talk with strangers. Then she'd vanish into the bedroom, texting until the light under the door finally went dark. I never asked who she was talking to. I didn't need to. The timing of her smiles, the sighs that followed it, all aligned with the messages I had already read weeks ago. There's nothing more painful than watching someone perform kindness out of guilt. Then came the dinner party. Emma wanted to celebrate again before leaving for her internship. Julia insisted we host it. I stayed quiet and agreed. Let her believe we were still coasting. Let her believe I was still asleep at the wheel. The night of the party, the house glowed. String lights in the backyard. Music floating gently through the speakers. Old friends laughing by the grill. Julia was perfect, charming, graceful, the model hostess. I watched her from the patio, red wine in hand, wondering how many of these people knew what she was planning. Had she already spun the story? Was I already the villain in rooms I hadn't entered yet? Toward the end of the night, Julia pulled me aside. "Hey," she said quietly, her voice light but her eyes unreadable. "Let's talk tomorrow, okay? I think it's time we make things official." I nodded, gave her a small smile. "Sure," I said. "Tomorrow." I don't think she noticed the slight curve in my tone, the way I rolled that word in my mouth like a blade being sheathed. That night, after everyone left, I sat at the kitchen table and reread my message to Emma. It wasn't accusatory. It didn't drag her mother through the mud. It simply told the truth calmly, factually, and with as much love as I could pour into it. I wanted her to know that none of this was her fault. That love can fail even when people mean well. That I had loved her mother once, and that love had built something good, even if it didn't last. I saved the letter. Sealed it. I'd give it to her when the dust cleared. The next morning came with quiet. Julia didn't speak as she made her coffee. She handed me a document. Preliminary terms, she called it. She looked almost relieved, like she had finally crossed some invisible line. "I'll be staying at my sister's for a while," she said, without a trace of sadness. I nodded. "Take your time." She blinked, surprised by my calmness. Maybe she thought I'd grovel. Or yell. Or cry. I did none of those things. Instead, after she left, I opened the laptop, dragged the file to a flash drive, and I waited. Because the stage was set. The audience was still. And the moment was coming. She just didn't know that her final act had already been rehearsed by me. 2 weeks passed before Julia returned to collect the rest of her things. I knew she was only back because she thought I'd be out of the way mentally, emotionally, maybe even legally. She assumed she had drained me of resistance. That I was quietly nursing the wound she'd carved open on stage. But by the time she stepped through the front door again, dragging an empty suitcase behind her and wearing that self-satisfied smile, I had already turned the tide in silence. She walked in like nothing was broken. That's the part that stunned me most. She commented on how clean the living room was, asked about Emma's new apartment in the city, and even had the audacity to mention how we could still be civil for her sake. That line nearly made me laugh. Civil? After public humiliation, months of lying, and a carefully orchestrated abandonment disguised as liberation? It was always amusing to see how cheaters rebranded cowardice as courage. I kept the conversation light. Just long enough. We sat at the kitchen island, two people who once shared a life, now separated by invisible minefields. She reached into her bag and pulled out another folder, her version of legal separation terms. She slid it toward me like it was a peace treaty. "I think this is fair," she said, as if fairness had ever been part of her equation. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood up slowly and retrieved a flash drive from the drawer behind me. I set it on the counter gently, almost reverently. Before we talk about fairness, I said, I think you should see this. She looked at it warily, her fingers curling around her coffee mug. What is it? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. I met her eyes. The version of events you didn't get to narrate. She hesitated, then plugged the drive into her laptop. I had created a simple interface. One button, unzip. She clicked. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of files labeled, dated, organized. Text messages, photos, voicemails, screenshots, transaction records. Even a scanned copy of the reservation confirmation from that boutique hotel in Santa Barbara, where she and Bryce had posed as a married couple. Her face changed almost instantly. Not panic, not yet. Just a flicker of recognition that the game board was not as lopsided as she'd assumed. She scrolled in silence. The cursor hovered, jumped, flicked back and forth. She opened the PDF labeled, Timeline of Deceit. It was a clean breakdown of her communications, layered with calendar entries and Emma's school events, the ones she'd missed or bailed on because of work. And then came the video file. I hadn't wanted to include it, but in the end, I knew it was necessary. It was a security cam clip. Our front porch. She hadn't known the camera caught audio that clearly. Her voice, laughing, unmistakable. Bryce's arms around her. The kiss. The words, he still thinks I'm at Pilates. The way she said it, casual, amused, cold. She paused the video halfway. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then clenched into a fist. Why are you doing this? She finally whispered. Her voice had lost all polish. I didn't answer right away. I leaned against the counter and studied her. The layers of performance had peeled back. No righteous crusade, no proud wife-turned-liberated woman. Just someone who realized too late that her exit wasn't as clean as she'd hoped. I'm not doing anything, I said calmly. You already did. I'm just making sure you remember it clearly. She didn't respond. Just closed the laptop slowly and stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. This is revenge? She asked, quieter now. No, I said. This is memory. She packed her things quickly after that. No more talk about fairness. No self-righteous monologues. And this time, no smug glances back. Just silence. Thick and loaded. As she reached the front door, she turned once, and I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe fear, maybe both. But I didn't indulge it. I didn't need to. She left without another word, and I locked the door behind her without ceremony. Later that night, I sat alone on the back porch. The sky was clear, stars bleeding into the horizon like spilled ink. I sipped a glass of bourbon and thought about Emma. She still didn't know. I'd decided not to show her the file, not yet. Maybe not ever. She deserved a version of her mother that wasn't tainted by infidelity and betrayal. Or maybe I was just stalling because I wasn't ready to watch her innocence unravel. Either way, I wasn't rushing. The next morning, I emailed my lawyer and told him we were proceeding on our terms. With everything documented, the division of assets leaned heavily in my favor. Julia would receive a fair, if modest, settlement, but nothing more. I wasn't cruel. Just precise. Over the next week, I watched the narrative shift around us. Her friends stopped calling. Word spreads fast when the evidence is undeniable. She moved in with her sister. Bryce, from what I heard, had begun reevaluating their relationship. Funny how appealing someone seems until they come with complications. And me? I started rebuilding. Not dramatically. No new car or fresh wardrobe. Just small, quiet things. I replaced the photos in the hallway. Rearranged the living room. I even took down the painting she loved, the one we got in Seattle on our anniversary. Not out of spite. I just wanted the space to feel like mine again. Unshared. Unedited. One afternoon, I found myself rereading my letter to Emma. I added a line at the bottom. The truth isn't always soft. But it's clean. I sealed it again. Still not ready to give it to her. But closer. And in the silence that followed, I realized something else. I hadn't just survived her betrayal. I'd transcended it. Emma's internship started in early July, and with Julia now permanently gone, the house fell into a new rhythm, quieter, simpler, and ironically, more alive. I drove Emma to the train station on her first day, helped her carry her suitcase, and handed her a packed lunch the way I used to when she was 10. She smiled, hugged me tighter than usual, and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." I didn't ask what she meant. I just held on to those words longer than she probably realized. Back at home, I returned to my routines. Mornings at the gym, afternoons consulting with clients, and evenings with a book or old jazz records humming through the walls. The silence no longer felt empty, it felt earned. And yet, something in me wasn't done. Not vengeful. Just unfinished. There were things left unsaid, truths not yet confronted. And a particular evening was approaching, the formal alumni dinner at Emma's school, where families of graduating students were invited to a final celebration. Emma had asked me weeks before if I would go, and I had agreed, of course. At the time, I didn't realize Julia had also RSVP'd. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a stage. I didn't want a scene. I wasn't out to embarrass her in front of strangers or smear her name in some melodramatic display. That would have made me no better than the woman who weaponized a graduation speech to script her exit. But there was something poetic about letting her see the version of me she underestimated, composed, unshaken, and most importantly, free. The night arrived. I wore a tailored navy suit Emma had helped pick out. Clean lines, sharp cuffs. I walked into the ballroom beneath chandeliers and murmured hellos, not expecting anything but polite nods. But I was wrong. People noticed. Not the Switney. Something had shifted. A quiet confidence. A man no longer tethered to someone else's storm. I spotted Julia across the room within minutes. She was wearing black, elegant, understated, and standing beside Bryce, who looked more like a guilty accessory than a partner. Their body language was stiff. Her smile, rehearsed. She saw me, and her face froze just a little too long before returning to polite neutrality. During the cocktail hour, Emma introduced me to her professors, her friends, even the dean. Her pride in me felt palpable. At one point, she squeezed my hand and said, "Thanks for always showing up." That landed heavier than she knew. Then, unexpectedly, Julia approached. Bryce lingered at the bar, pretending to be interested in the wine list. She stood beside me, glass in hand, and spoke just low enough to avoid attention. "You look good," she said, with a forced lightness. I nodded. "You look unchanged," I replied. She blinked, and for a second, I saw the tension flare behind her eyes. "I heard," she began, "that people have been talking. Sharing things." I sipped my drink. Truth tends to travel. Especially when it's documented. Her cheeks flushed. "I never meant to hurt you like that," she added. And maybe, in her own warped way, she believed that. I didn't reply. Dinner began. Speeches were made, laughter echoed across linen-covered tables. Then, in the last 10 minutes of the evening, something unexpected happened. The MC asked families of exceptional graduates to share a few words. Emma looked surprised when she was called up. She hadn't prepared anything. But she stood, radiant, and took the mic with ease. She thanked her professors, her classmates, her mentors. Then she paused. "But more than anyone," she said, her voice steady, "I want to thank my father." Because when people say parental support matters, they usually picture both parents. And sometimes that's not how life works. My dad taught me strength doesn't have to be loud, and integrity never crumbles even when everything else does. "I love you, Dad." Applause filled the room, but my heart was what thundered. Julia didn't clap. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her face locked in an unreadable expression. Bryce leaned away slightly. I remained seated, smiling softly, not out of pride but gratitude. After the event, Julia caught up to me in the parking lot. "She's angry with me," she said, half pleading. "She doesn't know everything." I finally turned to her and, for the first time, looked her directly in the eye without resentment. "She knows enough," I said. "And more importantly, she sees through everything now." Julia looked down. "You never exposed me publicly." "Why?" I paused. "Because some truths don't need an audience. Just time. And you're not my story anymore." I walked away after that, keys in hand, heart clear. That night, at home, I sat in the quiet again. Same porch, same bourbon, same stars. But something was different this time. I didn't feel haunted. I didn't replay old conversations or rehearse new arguments. I didn't open the folder or scroll through evidence. I didn't need to. The file remained untouched on my encrypted drive. Not as a weapon, but as a record. And records don't scream, they wait. In the days that followed, Julia never reached out again. The settlement finalized. Emma moved into her apartment and started her internship with glowing reviews. Life didn't just move on, it unfolded. And for once, I wasn't chasing peace. I was living in it. August bled into September, and the house, once loud with the cluttered sounds of cohabitation, now breathed like a clean slate. The quiet wasn't oppressive, Anna Maria, it was sacred. Each morning I opened the windows, let fresh air sweep through the rooms, and with it came the undeniable scent of closure. I had expected the ache to linger longer, but truth has a funny way of disinfecting everything it touches. Once it's all laid bare, there's nowhere for shadows to hide. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't pop a bottle or announce it to the world. I simply closed the email, stared at the screen for a moment, and nodded to no one in particular. I'd made peace with the end before the lawyers did. The court merely put a stamp on a process I had already walked through emotionally, step by brutal step. I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. I didn't crave her guilt. I had my name, my daughter, and the quiet confidence of a man who took back control the moment it was stolen. I'd started journaling again. Not out of nostalgia, but as a quiet record. It became part memory, part philosophy, part letter to Emma, though I wasn't sure if she'd ever read it. Maybe it was enough that I had written it. I'd scribbled down lessons I learned the hard way, like how betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers through subtle avoidance, in missed dinners, in half-hearted apologies. Or how strength isn't found in revenge and restraint. Not every war needs a battlefield. Sometimes your life rebuilt is enough of a monument. Emma came home for a weekend in October. She brought stories from her internship, a few coffee mugs for her kitchen, and a smile that looked more like mine than Julia's. We took a walk through the neighborhood park, the same one where she used to ride her bike in circles until she got dizzy. Now she walked beside me, tall and thoughtful, her fingers wrapped around a cup of cider. "Mom called," she said after a while, tone neutral. I didn't interrupt. "She asked if I'd come visit." Said she wanted to explain. I looked straight ahead, letting the leaves crunch underfoot before answering. And what did you say? I told her I don't need explanations, she replied. I needed presence. You gave me that. We didn't say much else after that. We didn't need to. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch, she noticed a small wooden box on the shelf. What's that? She asked, pointing with her chin. I handed it to her gently. Inside was a printed version of the folder, the one with everything, the texts, emails, receipts. Not for drama. Not as leverage. Just as record. That's the whole truth, I said. The one I protected you from, but also the one you have a right to understand. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, then closed the lid. I already knew, she said softly. Not the details. Just the feeling. You didn't need to prove anything. That night, I watched her fall asleep on the living room couch, wrapped in the same blanket she used as a kid. And I realized the file hadn't been for her. It had always been for me. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. That I wasn't crazy. That the betrayal was real and survivable. In the weeks that followed, I got back into painting. Not professionally. Just canvases in the garage. Abstract things, shapes, textures, shadows bleeding into color. The more I painted, the more I found myself not thinking of Julia at all. Not even in anger. That was the final sign of healing, indifference. Not in the bitter sense, but the peaceful kind. She had become background noise to a life I was fully reclaiming. I eventually deleted the file from my computer. Not impulsively. Deliberately. The last act of release. I kept the wooden box, though. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of who I had become. A man who didn't just endure betrayal but transformed it into quiet wisdom. Around Thanksgiving, Emma invited me to speak at her university's mentorship event. She said, "They want someone who understands reinvention." I almost laughed at the irony. I stood on that stage weeks later, looking at a room full of students just beginning their stories. And I told them the truth. Not about Julia. Not about the file. But about how the most important work you'll ever do isn't for an audience, it's for yourself. Behind closed doors. In the aftermath. In the silence. And as I left that evening, a student ran up and said, "You speak like someone who's been through fire." I smiled. "That's because I didn't just walk through it," I said. "I learned how to breathe in it." The thing about betrayal is, it doesn't just end with the act. It echoes through moments that should have felt whole, in conversations where silence suddenly weighs more than words. But eventually, you realize something freeing. Betrayal is only the beginning of the story, not the end. What comes after is what defines you. I don't hate Julia. I don't wake up replaying the worst parts anymore. There's no secret fantasy of revenge left to indulge. That's the difference between healing and hiding. When you're still hurting, you want to make them feel it. When you've healed, you just want to live well without them in your narrative. Emma and I built something better not because we had to, but because we chose to. We have dinner on Sundays now, no matter where life takes her. And every time she texts me a photo from work or calls just to vent about a tough client, I feel it again, that subtle, steady piece of being the parent who stayed. As for the story Julia once tried to write where she was the brave one walking away and I was the broken relic she left behind, I didn't fight it. I just wrote my own story louder. Quieter maybe on the outside. But deeper. Truer. The kind that doesn't need a stage to stand tall. So if you've been betrayed, don't rush to burn everything down. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't fire. It's foundation. It's building a life so steady, they don't even know where to aim next. Because when the storm finally clears, and the world grows quiet again, you'll hear it had soft, unshakable voice inside that says, "You're still here. And you're free."